Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, scoring 26 points after halftime, but scoring 27 well in advance is Derek Brissett. Derek, we have had the opening round of the 2024 Six Nations. I obviously not happy with the end result for the Scotland-Wales game, but I think it's been an interesting result across all three games. I don't think anyone was expecting France to falter so much or expecting Italy to be as strong as they were. But what did you make of the opening round so far?
Yeah, first of all, shout out Scotland. Once again proving my theory that the best defense is scoring a ton of points before the other team scores any. 27 to nothing lead at halftime gives you 26 points to play with, I guess, technically. I'm sure the
Yeah.
coaches aren't happy with it, but that was a really fun game if you really
Well,
coach.
technically, it was 20-0 at
Was it
halftime,
20 nothing at
and
halftime?
then Van der Merwe scored at the start of the
Wow,
second
so
half,
even
and
less time. There you go. So,
yeah.
yeah. So I mean, good for Wales for making the comeback, but yeah, that needed that one extra point. So I mean, a win's a win, man. Like in the
Yeah,
sixth,
it's.
a win.
I think after watching that game, everyone was saying like Scotland won, but it didn't feel like a win, and Wales lost, but it felt like a win. It's kind of like when the Arrows played New York last season, and Arrows scored, and like was it Deshaun Bowen scored three tries, and then we were in 2 points,
Yeah.
and it was like, oh, we're
But you know what
back,
though?
and we
At the
weren't.
end of the day, it doesn't matter what it feels like. It matters what it
Yeah,
is.
that's true. It is. It's
Wales lost this game. It's like
Wales lost this game, but it's not too bad. I mean, who have they got playing next? England. Oh well.
oh yeah,
Never mind.
yeah. You know
Anyway,
what though? But England like barely beat
Eng-
Italy. So
yeah, but I get that, but I also think that
Owen,
everyone will want to play a. I don't want to say weaker, but especially after following a World Cup in which a lot of players have announced their international retirement, you've got to get young blood into the squad. And the draw was that England played Italy first, so this is the time where you've got to, take guys who were born and raised in Cardiff and then have been playing in Exeter, and you got to have them on the bench for England. It's
hey,
just how it's got to be.
it's true. I mean, I don't know. There's part of me like watching this week, and I'm like, I would love to be watching these games with like Owen Farrell or like Anton Dupont. Anton Dupont
Yeah.
setting up highlight reel tries in the top 14 while France is losing to Ireland, and also just Owen
Yeah.
Farrell just being like, "Okay, guys, this is Italy." Like, I know Owen Farrell has retired, but
Well,
maybe
he's
he's
taken a
retired,
sabbatical,
taking a
but
sabbatical from yeah. He's like, I had enough of this.
I've had enough of this. I'm getting a paycheck in euros, and it's officially not my problem anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Um.
France, yeah. Everybody goes
Anyway,
to France for
yeah.
the international sabbaticals.
Well,
I mean,
some go to Japan. That's true. But that's and anyway, we're talking about the Six Nations, but we're going to be talking about last year's Six Nations later. Let's focus on Canadian rugby. This is a Canadian rugby podcast, after all. Um, and I think before we get into the news that's come out, I think we need to inform our viewers and listeners what our plan is for 2024 and beyond at the time being. So with the demise of the Arrows and there being like a disparity of seasons, because we know that the BC Premier League is continuing this weekend. And in fact, you can watch UBC Thunderbirds play for you can watch them for free on the Rugby Network. That was announced literally a few hours ago. So congratulations to them. All games are kicking off at 2:30 p.m. Pacific times. That'd be 5:30 p.m. on Saturdays. But the full schedule is available on the UBC Thunderbirds rugby website.
yeah, good for them.
But as Canadians know, rugby seasons are different across the country, and we always try and prioritize professional rugby or international rugby. So as a result, without a Canadian team in MLR at the moment, we are looking to do episodes every 2 weeks during the regular season, and possibly shifting to weekly episodes for the postseason. That's to be seen. Whilst we'd like to view Canadian efforts overseas, including in the top 14 and Premiership Women's Rugby, we also know that those are incredibly limited. For example, the top 14 isn't broadcast legally in Canada, and any clips or such from that will immediately get flagged and removed. So if there is a viral moment, we can talk about it, but we can't show you what it is unless we have to link to something else, such as the top 14 social media pages and things like that. So if something does come through, we will try and keep top of it, but again, very restrictive. Likewise, Premiership Women's Rugby, they only broadcast one game per round at present. So it's very hard to keep on top of everything that goes on in Premiership Women's Rugby without physically being there. That said, when it comes to international rugby, including the men in the Pacific Nations Cup and any Test series, as well as the Canadian women in the Pacific Four series, WXV, and any Test series, we will be doing weekly episodes on that. Any breaking news that should emerge, we will do an immediate episode where applicable. And we will be trying to get, more interviews with players, coaches, people who've had an impact on Canadian rugby throughout the year. But if it gets to a quiet point in the season, we may even revert back to monthly episodes at that point. So if you are a subscriber, if you're a viewer, if you're a listener, for the majority of this year, it's probably going to be uh, fortnightly episodes. When it gets to test season, it'll be weekly. And if it's a quiet period, it's probably going to be monthly at best.
I mean,
So,
to basically sum up what Stu said, we're going every 2 weeks unless a Canadian team plays, and then we'll do weekly episodes on that.
yeah.
That I think is the easiest way to kind of sum it up. At the end of the day, this is like a really, as much fun as this is, it is very time consuming. And
Yeah.
with with the arrows gone, I feel like we've always been, a podcast that talks about Canadian rugby, Canadian teams, Canadian players. And think if we kind of, I think we'll be able to, have better episodes, not drag out topics. If we go to every 2 weeks and can talk about how, like, especially in the MLR, like how players have been performing over the last like couple weeks and stuff. Instead of like, the sad truth is, unfortunately, like sometimes you get lineups and it's like, okay, like there's not a ton of Canadians in the lineups this week. Right. So we're kind of, I don't know. It's a little bit of a thing to help save us a little bit of time, allow us to, like, focus on the other things that we got going on in our lives while still, carving out the time to do this, which is a lot of fun. And I don't think we're gonna stop anytime soon, but we're gonna, ride out a little bit of a change in schedule, see how it goes. And, who knows, like Stu said that we might go back to like monthly or something, but who knows, maybe we'll end up going back to weekly too. We don't really know. But for now, we're rocking the every 2 weeks unless a Canadian team plays. I think
Yeah.
it's the easiest way to sum it up.
Yeah, I feel so. Speaking of Canadian teams playing, we have the dates for this year's iteration of the Pacific Four Series. Now, as we remember from last year, Canada played the USA in Spain, of all places. Then they hosted 4 games in Ottawa, including Canada versus New Zealand and Canada versus Australia. So it seems fair that Canada is the visitor for all the upcoming games. The first of which will be the USA versus Canada. That will take place on April the 27th. Then we have Australia versus Canada on May 11th. And finally, their Pacific Four concludes with New Zealand versus Canada. Now, at this moment, broadcast info and venues are to be confirmed. However, all those nations, USA, Australia, and New Zealand, will be taking on hosting themselves. So Canada will be going to the USA, then to Australia, then to New Zealand. Um, but then again, as I said, venues haven't been confirmed. Things may be moved around and such. It's interesting. I've actually looked at the schedule, is that the USA versus Canada, I was thinking about, okay, then New Zealand versus Australia, that can be, the same weekend, but in New Zealand or Australia. That's actually the weekend after the Australia versus Canada and New Zealand versus Canada game. So this iteration of the Pacific Four Series is taking place over 4 weekends instead of three, which is, you know, their choice, I guess, and maybe conflicting with um, Super Rugby Women's in the in
Well, it
New Zealand,
conflicts.
Australia.
Well, I mean, it conflicts with that. It conflicts with the French and English women's leagues as well, right? So I think like
Yeah.
to kind of
Yeah, Francois Ratier was pointing out that
yeah,
teams will be out without their American and Canadian,
yeah.
most likely, players for the
It's
few weeks leading up to the knockout state. Well,
yeah.
knockout state, elimination stages for the postseason.
It's
So,
it's honestly such a weird thing, like in rugby, because it's like rugby really is a sport that has no off season. It just depends on what part of the world you want to watch at any given point in time. Like
yeah,
literally every week of the weekend of the year, there's professional rugby happening somewhere, right? In
yeah,
some capacity. And you kind of it's like I still don't even really understand why it's like the premiership is happening right now, and it's like no one cares. The Six
yeah,
Nations is like a team like the Harlequins. Like you're gonna play a game on the same day that England's playing, like literally across
yeah,
the street from you. Like no one cares, which is like really weird. And it's also like the same thing that it was like those early MLR seasons too, where it conflicted
mm,
with the international test window. It's like, cool, we got to make our playoff push with no international players, or not our playoff push. I guess the first year was like the Arrows' whole first half of their first season had no international players.
yeah.
Like
No, it's
the first 8 games, they had
yeah,
like none of their best players, and then they got them all back, and then it shifts around to different points, and it's like where it is right now is it's like I hate the idea of like a 3 week break in the middle of the playoffs, but
yeah,
also I hate the idea of this teams having to compete in the playoffs without their best players. Like both of them are not good, right? And it's like it's a
yeah,
weird thing that like rugby seems to prioritize like in the international game so much ahead of club rugby all the time, right? On both
yeah,
the men's and the women's game, which I think does make it hard to build club
mm,
be right. And it's like it's kind of why like you even like I mean we're going to talk about full contact, but there was a part of full contact where I can't remember who it was, but one of the players was talking about how like even if you're not a rugby fan, you watch the Six Nations. It's like
yeah,
that's exactly like the whole kind of point,
mm,
right? Is it's like
yeah.
international rugby means everything, club rugby always takes a back seat, which I'm not
Mm.
really sure if that's the way it should be. Like the two should be able to coexist
Yeah,
better.
I put it this way, is that the URC has 16 teams from 5 different countries,
Yeah.
and they're not playing games during the Six Nations. Well, against
Yeah, they shouldn't.
England that has a 10
Yeah.
team structure that is. You know what? If they want to organize it as that, that's their prerogative. But anyway, focusing back on women's rugby, it's also been announced this week by Rugby Ontario and Rugby Quebec that there will be a new competition for senior women this April, which will be known as the Quebec Ontario Rugby Championship. There's not much information we have at the moment, only that there'll be 4 teams, which will be Quebec East and Quebec West, and Ontario East and Ontario West. And that'll be the teams competing in this competition. And it seems there'll probably be a either round robin or double round robin.
Yeah.
And no indication where the teams will be based, although the vagueness indicates that it'll be Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City. But we'll wait till things
So,
get
going based off of the little east and west.
the map and little dots
Yeah.
and te really testing my geographical knowledge of
I
Quebec here. So
ultimately though, I think this is a great idea.
yeah.
I hope it's I hope it goes well for all those involved, organizers, coaches, players, the two provincial unions, like because it is something that's needed. I mean, we can go back to the World Cup where like especially after the England game, right? Like Kevin Rouet and Sophie de Goody were really getting the message across that in order for Canada to take the next step, you need players that have more resources and more game time.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that does it, but I think it also addresses because you said, correct me if I'm wrong, Stu, you just said it's going to be in April, right?
It begins in
Begins in
April.
April, right? So it's like I think like it that is another thing that is super important on both the women's game and the men's game for that matter, is it's like the players that aren't under contract for the women's side, the players that aren't under contract with a team in England or a team in France or a team anywhere else in the world, right? That
Mm,
still have those national team aspirations. Like you need somewhere to play elite level rugby,
mm,
preferably like at home too, right? So like I think this gives players a chance to do that. On the men's side, I think it's very much the same thing, like especially with the arrows no longer existing, that's going to be like I don't know 20-ish like less Canadians in MLR like just automatically almost,
mhm.
right? And uh, and like I think like you're kind of looking at that. It's like it's the same thing on the men's side, where it's like the guys that don't have MLR contracts or even a contract overseas, but the guys that don't have MLR contracts that still need somewhere to go play at an elite level that they can develop. It
Yeah.
seems like the Vancouver Highlanders and the Atlantic Privateers might be kind of stepping into that territory.
Mm,
The Toronto Arrows Senior Academy also kind of seemed to start stepping into that territory, but obviously, with the demise of the Arrows goes the academy as well.
yeah.
But it's, I think it's great to see this also happening on the women's side of the game, where it's like you got to provide all these players with like a place to go play elite level rugby, like that's the only way everybody gets better, right?
Yeah.
And you see it in other sports all the time. It's like maybe you're not good enough for the top level today, but with the right like training, the right environments, you might be good enough for the top level tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's like you need to still foster environments that can create those opportunities. And I think on the women's side of the game, like this is seems like a nice step towards doing that.
Yeah. But yeah, obviously when we get more information about the competition, we will
Yeah,
let you
we also need,
know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
yeah,
all I can say is that they showed the graphic of all the team names, and every single player that was, the representation for that team was wearing blue. So I'm guessing at least one team is going to be wearing blue in one of the games.
yeah. One team's called the Blues, and the other team is in
Well,
Quebec. Whose
one's the
flag
Blues
is blue and
East and
white.
one's the Blues West. So you're
Yeah,
gonna have multiple blue
yeah,
variation.
a lot of blue
Anyway,
versus white. A lot of clash kits got to happen.
let's move on because we've also had the announcement of the squad for Canada's wheelchair rugby to take part in the 2024 Paralympic qualification tournament. So you'll know that we had the Para Pan Am Games last year, which the USA won. Winning that competition also gave them automatic qualification to the 2024 Paralympics. So Canada, as runners-up, will have to go into this qualification tournament. They will face off against hosts New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, Colombia, Germany, Netherlands, and Switzerland. And the only information I can find is that the top three teams will qualify for Paris 2024. So this doesn't appear to be a knockout tournament like it was with the World Championships or with the Para Pan Am Games. I think that what is going to happen is it's going to be a round robin tournament. So everyone will face everyone else. And basically the top three from that table will make it to the Paralympics later this year. So it's interesting. We have the final qualification tournament, and we have the world champions and the world runners-up in this competition. Because Australia got beaten by Japan in their regional qualifications. So, yeah, on paper, it looks as though those two, so Australia and Canada, should be getting through.
Mhm.
But just wondering who do you think's the third nation that's going to make it through?
So who'd you say? New Zealand and Canada to as your
Australia and Canada are the world number one and two, I believe. So,
um I don't know the most about wheelchair rugby, admittedly, but I feel like any tournament that has the word rugby in it probably is going to have a team from New Zealand. So I'll go with them.
all right. So I'm just going over the
I was gonna
official
say, do you
world.
want to give me your more informed answer to this question?
Uh, Not really, because I'm going over the world rankings,
Yeah.
and which were they were taken after the Para Pan Am Games. So
Okay.
these are as recent as can be, and they don't necessarily
Give me the
indicate.
whole world rankings. I'm just curious. I
Okay,
get more into
all right,
wheelchair
all
rugby.
right.
Like I just
So
want to know where everyone stands.
so world number one at the moment is the United States.
Okay.
Number two, the world champions Australia. Then we have Japan, then Great Britain,
Mm,
then Canada, who are fifth,
mm.
France, who are hosts, so they don't need to qualify, Denmark, who are seventh, who I think qualified at the same time as Great Britain, and then New Zealand. So New Zealand are ranked eighth, but of the available nations in this
The
tournament
third
yet to
highest.
qualify, they are the third highest. So you
Okay.
are correct, New
Okay,
Zealand.
so I wasn't too like out of line on that. All right, I'm kind of I'm kind of happy with that. It is cool to see like Brazil, that's another big like America's country and stuff too. Like
Yeah.
cool to see them like in in the mix here. It's crazy. So like Australia is the number two ranked team in the world, and they got to go to a qualification tournament.
Yeah, they should have beaten Japan in the final. I don't know what else
Oh, is that
to
what
tell
happened?
you.
Oh, big upset by
Yeah,
Japan. Okay.
yeah,
Wow. I mean,
Japan
that'll
pulled
be
off the upset and got into the Paralympics before the world champions did. So
oh wow.
make of that what you will.
Man,
But yeah,
Japan just loves the upset, eh? Like,
yeah,
there's
as
like
well.
no better country in rugby than just like absolutely tearing apart the dreams of a Southern Hemisphere green and gold team, ripping
And,
their
what-
hearts out.
and in case you're wondering, South Africa do not rank in the world
They don't have
rankings
a
for
world. They
wheelchair
don't have a
rugby.
wheelchair rugby team. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the ranking at the moment only goes up to 26 with Belgium, China, India, Malaysia, Mexico, Norway, Russia, South Africa, and Thailand unranked.
Where's the UK? Where did you say the U? Or do they
For Great
hide up?
Britain, they're
Okay.
fourth.
Yeah, they're fourth. Okay, fair
Yeah,
enough.
and so if you at home want to find out about wheelchair rugby world rankings, you can go to worldwheelchair.rugby,
Yeah.
and the world rankings are available there. The point system is pretty interesting.
What's
But
the
I'll put
point?
it like this:
I
Australia's current points are 567. Japan, who they are 526, Great Britain are 517, and then Canada are on 408. So there is quite a difference in the points, but obviously it just comes down to who's the better team on the day, and hopefully in this tournament it will be Canada who will be securing their spot at the 2024 Paralympics in Paris. All right, now going from one form of global rugby to another in sevens, as we have made the most recent stop, which was in Perth. And on the last episode, we said, oh, what Canada needs to do now is start winning more games.
that's
And, you
that's
know,
generally the formula, the preferred.
yeah, but in order to be in like the safety zone from this relegation tournament that'll be held at like the end of the season in Madrid,
Yeah.
I think there was an issue with our microphones because Canada did not do that in any way, shape, or form. Well, the men's didn't, especially. They had five straight losses, finishing 12th.
Yeah.
They are now 11th in the standings. But the interesting situation is other teams are also bad as well. So they are only 7 points from safety. So if they can get into like the cup quarterfinals, or ideally like the semifinals by the time the event comes to Vancouver, which will be held on the 23rd to the 25th of February this year, then they can start pushing themselves up and just getting into the out of the playoff spot to ensure that they're not facing the same issues they were last year of being eliminated or worried that Kenya are going to take their spot. The women, on the other hand, they had a much better tournament. They finished seventh overall, and they're currently sixth in the standings. And lucky for them, they are very good. And that means they are 18 points clear from the relegation tournament that the women will be having.
That's good.
Um, so yeah, some good, some bad. Hopefully, Canada can pull out their best performance so far when the Sevens party comes to Vancouver, and hopefully continue it to Los Angeles, Hong Kong, and Singapore before
Well,
that final tournament in Madrid.
both Canadian teams usually play really well in Vancouver on the Vancouver leg.
Mhm.
So hopefully we get a performance like that, like we've been used to seeing in the past few years. I think for the men's team, though, like so much of this season, it's obviously you want to, make sure you qualify for the seven series next year. But I think a lot of this season too is trying to build some momentum for that Olympic
Yeah.
qualifier tournament. Because I guess a similar situation to Australia and Japan in the wheelchair rugby or whatever, like there is some big guns going to this qualification tournament. Like
Oh yeah. Well,
Canada's gonna need to
well,
be performing at the like if you're gonna peak at a certain time this year, it's like the time to peak might be the qualification tournament. Like that's
yeah,
when you want
absolutely.
to be at your top form there.
Yeah, well, we also have two of the teams that are in the final qualification tournament for the Olympics are Spain and Great Britain, which are currently in 10th and 12th, surrounding Canada. But one of the other teams is currently fourth, and that is the Blitzbox.
Yeah, like
So,
it's you gotta
yeah,
like that's what
if there's
you're playing
one
for
game
now.
that you
Yeah.
want to be really, really good at, it's when you're facing the Blitzbox
Hey man,
in that qualification
can you
final.
beat them? Like
Yeah,
they're not
exactly.
invincible. Like it's
Yeah, can you prove that?
yeah,
So,
there's that chance, but I think that's to me, I'm like that's what the men's team is building towards. Like
hmm,
you got like one game you got to play the blitz box. I think Great Britain's going to that tournament too. So
yeah, yeah,
that's a wild qualification.
I think the qualifying, yeah, I think the qualification tournament may even be better than the Olympics, but we will see. Obviously, we want things to be going well, and for both the men and women. That's the thing. We keep talking about the men, and the women have just been so good. They're like, we're already qualified. We're not even stressing. It's all right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of Vancouver and North America as a whole, we are bringing it back to MLR because since we last recorded, the MLR and US Rugby Players Association have announced the signing of a voluntary recognition agreement. So, if you've been seeing the rugby union now posts, things, it has now been officially signed by MLR. So, this has been a long process. It's been taking a lot of time to get to this point, and I think it's reasonable to say that the demise of both the Arrows and the uh, Ironworkers in New York, I think, has really helped strengthen the calls for this to come about. So I
Well,
think that,
um,
yeah,
I think yeah, obviously the off season had a ton of change.
yeah,
There was a team that had to There's a team that relocated from Atlanta to Los Angeles. There's, as you just said, um, two teams that unfortunately folded. Then you also had a late addition of an expansion team,
mm,
which players that have had contracts signed already may have already bounced around a couple teams, just because of this dispersal draft and an expansion draft, and then this other, There's so much kind of happening in the league right now. But I don't know if this off season specifically is what maybe it's like you know the uh you know the final straw that finally got it done.
Yeah.
Like I feel like obviously the US Rugby Players Association, the MLR players have been kind of pushing for this for a while, right? Like
Yeah.
it's been something that they've obviously wanted for a while. It's nice to see that the league is going to recognize it and I guess now start maybe working towards developing a collective bargaining agreement. Um
Hmm.
it's good. Like I mean it's good for the players. Obviously rugby is a full contact sport, and as rugby, like any other full contact sport in in North America, like your career could be taken away very quickly,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and you can get traded, you can a whole bunch of things can happen to you that do not happen to people with quote unquote normal jobs. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, like, there's a reason that basically every professional league in North America has a players union, right? And that's the players kind of need them. So, from the players' perspective, like, I think, like, I'm happy to see this get done. Very interested to see what a potential collective bargaining agreement's going to look like, though, because
Mm.
that'll be fascinating. But yeah, man,
Yeah.
it feels like a good step for the league in general,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. So MLR CEO Nick Benson said through interaction with the USRPA leadership over the past few months, it became clear that both parties desired a collaborative approach. This agreement is the culmination of constructive dialogue and allows us to prepare for structured engagement going forward to the benefit of the league and its players. And then Nick Savetta, who is a former MLR player and the USRPA board chair, said in our conversations, we have come to understand that MLR and the USRPA share a common dream of the success of rugby in North America. We are pleased to have achieved voluntary recognition for MLR players. This process provides a framework for players to shape the future terms and conditions of their employment. We look forward to engaging with the league constructively to build a bargain contract focus on the future of the player and the league. So yeah, I know that from having looked at the Rugby Union Now website, their demands, you should say, weren't outrageous. They're not looking for like
This
to turn players into millionaires or something. It's just to guarantee safe playing conditions and to ensure they can get like healthcare coverage and to be
Yeah.
notified for um for if and when teams should relocate or fold, there's more support in their play. And it's hard to really argue against that. So this seems like a great step forward for the league. And hopefully that players going forward are in a much stronger position.
Yep.
Anyway, let's move on to some signing news. So Reed Davis has signed for Seattle Seawolves. Reed has played for the Pacific Pride, and if I remember correctly, he was named and he was named the 2023 Rugby Canada National Academy MVP. He was also listed as a non-traveling reserve for the men's tour to Spain this past November.
Yeah.
So congratulations, Reed. Welcome to MLR. Good team to be going with, obviously. Obviously not too far away from the Pacific Pride. So,
No.
may even have the opportunity to face some of them in their preseason fixture. So that'll be
Yeah, yeah, they
fun
announced
to
that.
see.
That's cool. That's a
And with Anthem RC have announced their full roster and obviously focused on American development. So no Canadians listed, but they did have the announcement of Te Rangatira Waitakia has signed for them as part of their foreign player allocation. And, he would have been an arrow for 2024. It never gets easier, Derek, to say he could have
I
been.
know. Well, if there's ever a MLR team in Toronto again, we'll make sure we give him one of those really nice like thank you for playing for Toronto like player tribute videos. Be a
Yeah,
really an intense, be a really emotional video, I'm sure for fans and
yeah,
Wetokia like um
absolutely.
Other anthem news, their kits. Any thoughts?
So I think very much a solid color of like blue, reflecting the Blue Ridge Mountains and
Yeah.
the colors of Charlotte's sports scene. The
I
stars
love the
and stripes.
nonsense that pro sports teams make up to explain jersey designs now.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Yeah. The stars and stripes, I think that pattern was previously trademarked by Old Glory
Uh,
DC.
I mean, the thing is it's like I actually really like the stars and stripes on it. Um, I think
I
it's
get
kind of
it. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying like it's
yeah.
feels very reminiscent of another team.
So
I think the blue is a unique. It's not like the navy blue of the US flag.
it's the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah. Yeah,
It is what
yeah,
it is.
those are the
Just
colors.
call it
But
what
I
it is.
can imagine that when it gets to like July the 4th and teams are doing like, oh, heritage kits or
No, it's
vintage
a nice
kits, I
color.
can see the stars being a different blue, some of the stripes remaining white, some of them turning red and being like, oh, what a surprise. How did we end up with this design? Um, but ultimately, I think I first saw the stars and I immediately thought of Dallas with their big
Yeah, the
star on their
Giants.
jersey.
Yeah, a lot of teams with stars in this league now. Um,
Yeah.
I think like I really like the kits. I mean, I thought I've seen the argument that it's like the stars and stripes thing looks a lot like Old Glory. And I'm like, yes, because that Old Glory is a team that is in the US nation's capital and literally named themselves after the flag. They have
Yeah.
numerous years in MLR where their jersey was just the flag. Like that's what they wore. I think that's what I kind of really like about this jersey, like especially in the Eastern Conference. You obviously have Old Glory, which again is a team that's named after the American flag. And you also have the New England Free Jacks, which also plays up the red, white, and blue color scheme, a bit of a patriotic nickname, right? And it's like to have the USA National Development Program like in the same division as those two teams, it's like that's too many like red, white, and blue patriotism themed teams,
Mm,
quite frankly. So I think
yeah.
like I really like the colors because it's like I mean, like I kind of said, it's like the colors kind of feel like they pay tribute to like the other Carolina sports teams, right? The Panthers kind of have that
Mm,
color. The Hornets are also kind of that color. Even like the Tar Heels are, not obviously a bit more of a powder blue, but like the blue and black seems to gel really well with a lot of Carolina teams. So I think like
mm,
I think the colors being what they are, I think ultimately the jersey design is a really good way to represent the Carolinas region, as well
mhm.
as the stars and stripes is a cool idea to pay homage to the fact that they are a USA rugby development team, but without actually looking like Old Glory or the Free Jacks. They did a creative way of, I think, getting the best of both worlds there.
I think one thing that really helps as well is that there's an absence of red anywhere.
Yeah.
Like
There's no
that
yellow though, which is weird because when they announced the team, they had a lot of yellow in their announcement.
yeah, I
There's no
think I
yellow
think that is a
anywhere
bit
on the
odd
jerseys.
now that you mention it. But
Yeah,
I should also
there's
say
no yellow
I
anywhere.
so I think the home jersey
Yeah,
because it has that bit of black on the sleeves, like on the cuffs,
yeah,
and the shorts are just plain black. And I think that works as well.
yeah. It does work. I think it looks good. I think the home one looks good. The white version of it, I still think looks good. But that blue and black, I think the
Yeah.
home kit's the winner out of the two, really. But
Yeah.
I
Well,
can't.
that's
I
the thing.
can't.
We're just looking at the
Yeah.
CGI generation. When they actually step out onto the field in those kits, then we'll be able to see how it
Say
all
that every year.
looks.
But I mean, that being said, though, it's like there's some pictures of like the Chicago Hounds in their kits now, and like
Yeah.
best, best might be the best rugby kit in the world right now. Like all black. It's honestly probably right now all blacks, and then
Mm.
Chicago Hounds might be the best rugby kits going right now.
Mm. That's a high praise from you, Derek.
It is what looks. Have you seen the Chicago Hounds
Oh
kit?
yeah, yeah. I've seen it. I know how good it looks.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
I watched Six
Any
Nations full contact. No one's got a jersey that looks that good.
All right. Anyway, we're just going to take a quick detour and we're going to talk about SRA, so Super Rugby Americas.
Yeah.
We don't usually talk about it on this podcast, but some news came through that the American Raptors have had to change their coaching structure. So they have hired David Butcher as their head coach and Corey Hector as their attack coach. So they are an American team with Canadian coaches.
But
Now,
wait,
they don't have any Canadian players that I'm aware of.
have
So
no Canadian players this year. They had Siaki Vikilani last year, though.
the only player to date that I'm aware of that has played in, or the first Canadian to have played in MLR and Super Rugby Americas. And but as in, we keep saying you want to win trophies, you want to win championships, you got to get more Canadians in the
Yeah.
squad. Now I know that the American Raptors are going to be based in Glendale and they're part of the structure of the American team, blah 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 blah. But you know, if you want to win championships, I don't see any of the other South American teams having Canadians
None of
in their
them are
squad. So
Canadian.
your chances of winning have therefore increased 100%.
Yeah.
And actually now you have two. You have David Butcher and Corey Hector. So technically it's increased 200%.
Well, there.
So
So, um, like, I mean, yeah, like it's honestly like I think it's like a cool opportunity. Like, I mean, that's obviously part of what the Arrows were too. It's like it wasn't just a place for Canadian players to develop their game. It was a place for the coaches to develop their game as well, right?
mhm,
And it's really cool to see David Butcher and Corey Hector. Like, I mean, two guys that obviously have been part of the Arrows, coaching staff for a while. Butcher was at Queens, Hector was at Guelph. They're two like of the powerhouse teams in on Ontario University Rugby,
mhm.
right? And honestly, just really cool that they are getting an opportunity to continue to coach in professional rugby. And in all honesty, it's probably going to be a lot of fun for them. It's a bit of a unique experience playing, you know, the American Raptors and what that whole club is about. A lot of like, conversions
Yeah.
and stuff, but also, you got to play in all, with the exception of your team, it's an all South American league. So, probably be a little bit of a cool experience, something that, you don't really get to take part of all that often. Right. And, honestly, just
Hmm.
wish them the best and, hopefully hopefully the Raptors have a great season for them. Like
Yeah.
and honestly, it's like I'm cheering for the Raptors. It makes me care so much about the Raptors than I ever have.
Exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
like I'm locked into Raptors rugby now. So
Mm. Well, we're going to be let's move on to another team that has Canadian coaching. That is the Vancouver Highlanders because they are continuing to list off names on their signings. So we have joining the team Connor O'Flaherty, Talon McMullen, Jacob Bossy, and Milani Nanai, who is the first non-Canadian to be signed for the Vancouver Highlanders. Now, according to I think it was Brian Ray, is that Nanai was originally supposed to be playing for the New York Ironworkers in 2024. Obviously, that team is no longer with us and is currently playing club rugby in Vancouver or BC, I should say, and is now signed up to join the Highlanders. So, congratulations to all those players who've signed. And it was also announced today that the Highlanders will be announcing every Saturday from February 11th a player that will be on their reserve squad. So, the reserve squad will be training with the Highlanders during the week. And then, should any injuries come about, these players will be called up to the main squad. So, when that information comes out, we will point you in the right direction. And if you want to get it straight away, you can follow the Vancouver Highlanders on Twitter, on Instagram. I think they're on Threads as well, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
they're on.
And
Saw them on LinkedIn. Start following them on LinkedIn.
like,
If you're
yeah, you can
into
do that as
LinkedIn, you
well.
can do that. Honestly, like I think the reserve squad announcement, like I mean, all the players that you mentioned, it's great that they're signed. Um, always excited for those announcements, but the reserve squad, I think, is the most excited I've been for a Vancouver Highlanders announcement, just
Hmm.
because I'm like, obviously the club is drumming up enough interest to have a reserve squad. Like that's kind of cool, right? Like if there's so many, you know, players that are interested and want to play like a high level rugby, obviously part of the Vancouver Highlanders thing is play high level rugby while also helping you out with like your professional career as well, right? So, but it's really cool to see that there's that many people, that many rugby players that are interested in playing for the Highlanders that you know they are deeming it necessary or deeming themselves able to actually have a reserve squad.
Yeah.
No matter how big that reserve squad is, it is actually to me it does seem kind of cool that they're actually they haven't even played a game yet and they're able to do that. But you know, that'll be I don't know. I just think that's really cool that if they're getting that much interest in players joining their team.
Yeah, so the press release that is available on their social media channels say that the reserve roster will have 20 reserves who are elite members of the British Columbia Rugby Union clubs and will train with the Highlanders and be coached and developed by our staff. Available for call up, ready to fill gaps that may develop in our front lines. And the coaching staff have already started to attend BCRU matches to identify the worthy few who might become future Highlanders.
So
So,
that announcement is basically so that's saying that they have 20 extra guys that want to be Highlanders or that
well,
can be
I think
Highlanders.
it's the indication that the team wants 20 extra guys.
That's
Because the full roster is 25 players, and then the reserve roster will be 20, so a total of 40 players available
40,
to play for the Highlanders.
25
But
20 is 45, right? That's
yeah,
what,
that's what isn't
yeah.
that what I said?
No, you said
45?
40. You know, math's hard. It's not a math
Yeah,
podcast. It's fine.
yeah. But it also concludes with Um, please read through our website, and if you have what it takes to make a commitment to our program, email Randall Barton at randall@vancouverhighlanders.com.
Oh,
So
listen.
I think it's a two-pronged approach. I think it's they're scouting for players, but obviously if someone says, "Oh, I've already got other commitments, I can't play in the off season," or things along those lines, and if there's someone that's like, "No, I'm interested in what the Highlanders are doing, come take a look at me, and if I'm like capable of playing to your standard, then we can work something out." So yeah,
I
I
mean,
think it's a really good opportunity for these 45 players, whoever they may be, even if the 25 of the full roster has already been decided. And yeah, and so an opportunity for 20 other guys to step up from the BCRU clubs and make a name for themselves, really.
they also say to like go to their website to find out what they're all about, but I also kind of want to add that go back and just listen to our episode with them because they
If you want more information about the
yeah
Vancouver Highlanders,
we got like an
listen
hour and
to
a
our
half.
most listened to, watch our most watched
Yeah, let's.
episode, and I'm sure you'll get all the details.
I was gonna say I feel like we need to become like just huge Highlanders fans. Like we need to
Yeah,
deck ourselves out in like red and black Highlanders gear. I think.
yeah,
Oh, change the yeah. Like we're already in like Le Rouge. Like that's already half of
yeah, that helps.
that's already
So
half
yeah,
the colors. Yeah, let's.
so if you want to follow the Vancouver Highlanders, they're available on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. No TikTok channel yet, but I think that's going to be a vlog of. Um,
Do you think Curry Hitchborn's a big TikTok dance guy? Like,
no, I think Corey Hitchborn is doing TikToks to show his development into getting ready to be Duncan for all the games.
yes, you're right. It's
The Bowflex is
the
getting.
Bowflex TikTok. Yeah, the workout TikTok. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be the surprise, and then they're going to launch the TikTok, and all those videos are going to be ready to go a week before the first game. Anyway, we're looking forward to that. But something that has come out in the past couple of weeks, which has been huge, according to Netflix especially, is Six Nations Full Contact. So Full Contact is an 8 episode series that follows the teams and players from the 2023 Six Nations Championship. So it now, when this was being recorded, there was loads of stories going on behind the scenes of players and unions not really being open to this going on. It's like distracting for the players. It takes the focus away. Um, However, since it's been released and the numbers from Netflix look good for the 2024 Six Nations, because it was a 2 year contract in place, apparently now all the unions want Netflix to come in and record them and
That's how it.
keep, yeah.
That's
It's
how it.
basically the same situation that happened with Drive to Survive, as in like Ferrari and Mercedes wanted no part of the first season until it got so many viewers, and then they're like, "Oh yes, come look at that garage, come look at that car and drivers."
All
And
it, all it takes is the teams realizing that the reason that you lost wasn't because there was a camera following around your fly half, and
yeah,
and then they're just like, oh, like this actually can make money and make our players more popular and actually do some marketing, and people might know who the players on our team are. We should maybe engage in this a little bit more.
yeah,
Although I gotta say, like I mean, we'll get into what our thoughts and stuff on it are, but like it kind of does feel like a lot of at certain points in the show, I do think it feels like teams and players are maybe a little more reserved and cautious
yeah,
about like what they say or what's shown or whatever. Um, like I think there was a little bit of that. Like you can kind of at certain points in the show, I did feel like you could kind of feel that there was maybe like a little bit of a slight like unwantedness to it because like it's not quite as deep as some other sports docs and stuff. Especially like if it does though, I will say it's very close to the
mm,
first season of Drive to Survive. And like Drive to
yeah,
Survive really gets going in like season 3 or whatever,
yeah,
like once everybody gets like used to it and stuff. Um so it's like it's if you're trying to compare it to like last season's Drive to Survive and stuff, it's like it's not there,
yeah.
but it's like it does kind of have that that
Mm,
first like we've never done this before. We're gonna have a bit of a feeling out process, and then like if it gets received well, I think there's gonna be um some more. But
yeah,
do you want to kind of get into your thoughts on the show? I feel like this might be a like it's tough.
yeah,
I know it's like obviously we all know the results of the Six Nations, but there is
yeah.
definitely like scenes and stuff that I don't know. Perhaps you don't want that spoiled for you.
So if you haven't seen Full Contact and you don't want spoilers, we recommend pausing the podcast now, watching all 8 episodes, and
And
coming back. So
I go back. Also,
three,
this is going to be the last thing we talk about on the podcast for
yeah,
today. So, like, just pause it here and then come back, and
yeah.
you're not missing
Uh,
any other topics. We're not going to get through to anything else. It's just full contact. So, if you haven't watched
yeah.
it, and you don't want to be spoiled, uh,
Okay, we're gonna give you 3 seconds to pause. Three, two.
I can't believe Ireland won. It's
Unbelievable.
unbelievable.
What a it's fixed. It
Yeah, I know.
is
Jeez, I cannot believe Ireland won. That is
yeah.
nonsense. Well, that's
Okay.
terrible
So all
writing.
right. Okay, so let's go into actual thoughts because we're big rugby fans. For me personally, like the Six Nations is, a culturally relevant event in the United Kingdom, at least. Is like when it's on, it's shown in every pub, it's shown in
Yeah.
clubs, it's shown in places that wouldn't necessarily have shown rugby any other time of the year except for the World Cup.
Mhm.
Um, I think the approach was balanced between people who have never seen rugby before and strong diehard fans of it. So my concern was going in as in they're gonna be handling it with kid gloves and taking the audience through every little bit, and we're explaining in detail why this why tries are important and why penalties are important. And it's
So
like
happy they didn't do that.
I appreciate that the um, production was able to say like people know enough about rugby that they know why how to pass, they know why um they try and like tries are important, and then they do get into the cultural understanding a bit more, because I think that's something that would if you're a fan of rugby but you've only been playing rugby in North America and you don't understand the cultural um history of, say, games between Scotland and England or Wales and Ireland, or the importance of the world rankings and being between Wales and no, sorry, Wales, Ireland and France, and why that was an all important game. This gave you context, but I'd say like the most significant thing is the individual players that were highlighted throughout each episode, particularly the guys that we now know will not be in the Six Nations again. So Stuart Hogg, Johnny Sexton, Dan Bigger, Louis Rees Summit, although that was
Honestly, that
well,
was the one thing they started to do, like the little like where these guys ended up, like in the year after. I was waiting so hard for the Luis Reese Zammit is now trying to be an NFL player, little like subtext thing, but
yeah.
we never got it.
I
Got a
don't
random
yeah, I think but I think that may be in one like Wales's episode or one of Wales's episodes for this season
next
coming
year.
up.
Yeah, exactly.
Um
It'll be a, yeah, exactly. That'll
so
be
but ultimately, as in so there's an episode called The Last Dance, which is talking about Ireland and Scotland, and it's the I believe the penultimate round of the Six Nations, and it's Scotland saying that they've beaten Wales, they've beaten England, they lost to France, but if they beat Ireland, then they can claim the Triple Crown, and it's like only the game against Italy they have to finish the tournament. But this, and Stuart Hogg was saying like he has never won silverware in the Six Nations, and Scottish fans are very aware of how barren their cabinet is, with the exception for the Calcutta Cup and the Dolly Weir Cup. But I understand as like the Triple Crown is something that has been missing from
yeah,
Scotland's trophy cabinet, as has the Six Nations Championship
yeah,
itself. And then you have Jonathan Sexton, who's you know looking to get his third Grand Slam, Ireland's fourth overall, and yeah, and getting to spend some time with these players outside of the um,
yeah,
rugby structure. Time with family, time on the farm, for Stuart Hogg and stuff. And then yeah, in like the final episode, it has Johnny Sexton being named. Johnny Sexton retired at the end of the year. He is the all-time Six Nations point scorer. And then you have Stuart Hogg, who is mentioning about how many surgeries he's had, how he's basically being
yeah,
held together by scotch tape and stuff like that. And it's like he had to retire as well. And Dan Bigger as well, when he was talking about, because he was like, I'm getting on in my years. I'm still trying to get, that starting jersey, because for a number of games in the tournament, he was on the bench.
yeah,
And he knew then, obviously, he knew before his public announcement that he'd be retiring after the World Cup, that this was going to be his final Six Nations, and being with the family in uh Toulon, which I kept forgetting that he joined Toulon in
yeah.
2022. I kept thinking like, oh yeah, it was like after the World Cup he moved to Toulon and
No, yeah.
played for them, but
There's
no.
a few of those.
Um, and yeah, and what was it, Stephen Varney? His bit, because he's Welsh born. He's played with Louis Rees-Zammit. He's played the same club as him, but he has the like his parents and grandparents Italian, and I think that also helps put the argument of, well, this player wasn't born here, so he can't play for this nation. It's like you do not understand how significant
Yeah,
family relations are and generational influence can be. And like, yeah, he was trained by the Welsh system, so he should play for Wales. No, he can play for whoever he chooses or whoever wants him.
what's some? Yeah,
And yeah, so ultimately, I'm giving like full contact 8 out of 10. I think it was
yeah,
fantastic. And I've actually seen on the rugby union subreddit, someone was asking why did Wales in the 2024 Six Nations, why are they currently getting 2 bonus points when they lost a game, whilst Italy only got 1 bonus point and France got none? And they're saying like, "Oh, I've only just started getting into rugby because of full contact, so it's already doing its job. People are already saying like, hey, this looks really good. I want to learn more about it."
yeah. I'm
That is
I mean,
fantastic.
yeah, I think that's ultimately kind of the goal. I mean, that is kind of what the like success of Drive to Survive kind of was for F1, right? Is it grew the fan
Yeah,
base because of that. I I mean, I think I'm with you in the general like 8 out of 10 range for the show. I think there's areas for it that it can improve on, but I also like thoroughly enjoyed all 8 episodes. Um
yeah,
I think I think it's really interesting though that you like the episodes that you kind of specifically mentioned as you were talking about the show were episodes 6, 7, and 8, because those were clearly the three best episodes to me too. Um
mm,
and it's kind of like I found it very like interesting the way the show was structured like as a whole, right? Because it seemed like I haven't tried it yet. I've only actually watched through the show once, but like feel like you could probably watch episodes 1 through 6 in any order that you want and
mm,
then watch
yeah,
episode 7 and 8, right? Because all episodes 1 through 6 really are is you get the first episode, you get the Finn Russell and Scotland, right?
yeah,
Like their whole point of view, their story, or whatever. Then you get Ellis Genge and England, but they also kind of mixed in Sebastian Neguri and a little bit of like Italy. Which
yeah,
seems kind of odd considering later. But like then you had episode 3 is Andrew Porter and Ireland. Episode 4 is our favorite NFL player, Luis Rees-Zammit in Wales, right? Episode 5 is basically Gail Ficou and France.
mm,
Episode 6, Stephen Varney and Italy. Sebastian Neguri comes back into the story a little bit more at that point too. And then you
yeah,
get episode 7, which is the Hog versus Sexton matchup and like the whole last dance thing. And then you get the final weekend, right?
yeah,
But I think ultimately because the way they did that kind of structure, I'm like, dude, it does not matter which order you watch these episodes in, as long as you do 7 and 8 last,
yeah,
right? Because those are actually like this is the results of the Six Nations. Um,
mm,
which I think is very interesting format. I like the idea of maybe focusing on teams, but like I think it's also kind of weird because of that format. Like Johnny Sexton,
mm,
a player in his final Six Nations, absolute legend. They call him the best Irish player ever at the end of the doc. He doesn't show up until the seventh episode of this series.
mm,
Like
yeah,
he's not in it, right? And I mean, they obviously took like a very um interesting like structural approach here, right? With basically focusing on one or two players, maybe a player and a coach usually, I guess, right? And that
yeah,
for the first 6 episodes, but it also kind of meant that there's a lot of big players, Sexton, Hogg, Farrell. I think among the three of them that don't show up until the seventh episode. Like they don't have anything like meaningful to do. They have no storyline. They're not. I don't. They're barely even mentioned until
yeah,
episode 7, which I think like is an interesting choice. It's something that a new fan probably wouldn't notice, but it
yeah,
felt like going through 6 episodes of a Six Nation show without really mentioning some of the superstars of the Six Nations
Mm,
felt kind of odd. Like a Drive to Survive season that doesn't mention Lewis Hamilton until the second last episode, right? Like it's I don't like I felt like the structure is a little because they structured it like that was a little
mm.
odd. Um, and I'm not really sure if that's just because like obviously it's made by the same people that made Drive to Survive, right? And
Yeah.
I'm sure you would feel the same way. It's basically they took the Drive to Survive template and
Yeah. No, they absolutely did. But
right.
I think one of the issues I've had with like Drive to Survive is that they will
They jump around
talk.
out of
Yeah,
order.
they jump around.
Yeah.
They'll go over like the
They did
first
that in
race of the
this
season for
too.
like
Yeah.
half the episodes, and then and this actually came back to bite them in the backside in 2021 because every season then had, Lewis Hamilton just getting wins after wins, and then the championship was decided like early in the season, and then it was only for the review of 2021 they had to start doing chronological episodes in like episode 7 and 8 because they realized that, oh, this is coming down to the wire, the last episode will have to be about the last race. And they did 2 episodes on McLaren,
Just to be like,
who
oh yeah,
were
by the way,
not
these guys
good that
are
year.
doing well. They're like, um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of
Yeah.
the same.
But I think as well, I think what the benefit of doing like the Six Nations as opposed to say doing like the Premiership or the
Yeah,
URC is that because it is only like 5 rounds, it's
yeah,
very
it's very
simple,
yeah.
and therefore you're not, and there's 6 teams, and
You can
you can.
jump back and forth basically.
Yeah, so for example, the first episode is Scotland, it's a game against England, and then it goes to their game against Wales. And because you've been following the Scotland team, you're like, yeah, they got 2 wins, fantastic. And then the next episode, you go to England, and you're like, okay, now we'll see it from the other side
Side.
of that Calcutta
All
Cup
right. Oh,
match.
I think
And then they bring in Nagiri for that episode, but I think that's also highlighting the impact that Ellis Genge had in that moment
in that
because
moment.
he's obviously the main focus of an English player at that time for that episode. Sorry, so I think that there's like it's a stretch, but it makes sense. And then so I
I
think for like
I
a
don't even
new
think
fan,
sorry,
what?
I was gonna say I don't even think it is a stretch though, but I think like I actually liked that more than the other episodes focusing on like one player on one team because I think like having
Yeah,
the Ellis Genge Nagiri story, right, where like Nagiri got like knocked out, started swallowing his tongue, and Ellis Genge is the one that was like basically the first on the scene, popped his mouth guard out, helped him,
yeah.
you
Put
know,
him in the recovery
yeah, put him in the
position.
recovery position and stuff, and like genuinely probably contributed to saving his life. Um,
Yeah, well, Nagiri states that
yeah,
in the
exactly.
episode.
And it's like that's a brilliant story, but by also putting Nigiri in an earlier episode, it's like when Italy kind of shows up in the Irish episode, the Welsh episode, the French episode, because they already
Yeah,
gave you a story on Nigiri, like the obviously the injury, but also like the fact that like that like his girlfriend like walking through like whatever city they were in Italy trying to be like what about that engagement ring and stuff
yeah,
that story. It made you care about Nagiri like the
yeah.
entire series, whereas like everybody else was just kind of like, here's your kind of like your one off, unless like
Yeah.
the big focuses
The,
came, right?
I think the only negative, and this isn't the producer's fault, is that one player that isn't mentioned much, and like he only talks for like one scene, and that's because it was like a um
Josh Vanderfleer, is that where we're going?
no, it's Alan Wynne Jones.
Alan Wynne Jones. Yeah. Well, actually, so I mean, all right, you said Alan Wynne Jones. I think that is like um I don't necessarily like I don't know, yeah, like well that's I think the thing like
I think that's like the issue of players don't want to get involved
that's
because
exactly
it's a
what I was gonna say.
distraction, so
Um,
they
I
don't. And Alan Wynne Jones, to his credit, has never been one to like look for the limelight. He's
yeah, but he
always been
should
like,
be.
do your job, get on with it. go
like,
from there.
well, I think that's one thing. It's like Alan Wynne Jones for sure, obviously stuck out to you. But I think like that's kind of I really genuinely like the idea of being like, here is one player or one or two players each episode, major focus on their story, give their story time to like breathe, time to tell it. I think it was really effective with Finn Russell. I thought the Andrew Porter episode it was really effective with. It was definitely effective with Stephen Varney, which I thought was probably the best episode of the year. And I also think of the season, and I also think it was really effective with Blair Kinghorn at the in the final.
Yeah,
Blair Kinghorn legitimately might be the best part of this entire um the best like player, I guess, in
yeah,
this entire like show. I thought I'll get into more of what he had to say in his whole character arc or story arc, like throughout the show and stuff. Because I thought him and Varney were the two most fascinating players in this. But to kind of circle back, it's like when you're talking like Alan Wynne Jones, and you're like he didn't show up at all, right? And I don't like binge watching things, so I didn't watch this in one shot. I kind of broke it up a little bit over like the last 2 weeks or so that I've been watching it. Um,
yeah.
but like as I was kind of going through, you remember one of our listeners, Mark Button, directed us to that Good, the Bad, and the Rugby episode from like say around Christmas maybe or December
Mhm.
after the World Cup. That it was they were trying to like talk about like who's the next like superstar in rugby, and they went
Yeah,
through a list of like 20 some odd players, right?
yeah,
And there was like and a super unfortunate number of guys, right? Like on a number that like World Rugby should probably be a little embarrassed about, quite frankly. What like the podcast dismissed almost immediately, just based on the grounds that they're like that guy doesn't want to do it, like doesn't want to do like the media, doesn't want to do like the appearances and stuff, right?
yeah.
And they dismissed a lot of really talented rugby players, and I think as the show kept going, especially as like each team kind of had their big episode and would kind of like we were like knocking off teams in the Six Nations, it did kind of become apparent that I'm like I do think that that is a little bit of a problem in rugby, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like this show, like you just said, right? We're calling like this whole like, especially episode 7, The Last Dance, right? Is all Hogg versus Sexton, right?
Yeah,
Alan Wynne Jones is a legend on their level, if not surpassing.
yeah.
Definitely on their level. No mention of it being his last Six Nations either. Right.
No,
Like no mention of any
but
of that.
but
But
yeah,
also, furthermore, I just want to
yeah,
keep going because I have a list of players and I'm like, where are you? Right.
yeah,
Literally, Josh Vanderfleer of Ireland, the at the 2023 Six Nations. So Josh Vanderfleer is the reigning player of the year in
yeah,
the Six Nations. He has maybe 5 seconds of screen time. And it's
mm,
only because Hugo Moyne mentioned that he's the best player in the world, right? He's
yeah,
and his 5 seconds, I think it just cuts to a clip of him laughing, like in the
yeah.
chair, like nothing. Mero Itoje, not in
Hmm.
this at all, right? Like
Yeah,
at all. And you can go through every team and pull apart guys that you're just like, they're just not in this. Like, right. And it's like I think as that was going, I did have a hard time thinking about like I had a hard time not thinking about that Good, the Bad, and the Rugby episode. And also, now that you've mentioned it, also thinking back to what you said, is just like some guys view it as a distraction. Guys clearly don't want to do it. And it's like, no, that's a problem in rugby because it's like, and it's not like right. That's I think that's a bit of a problem in
mm,
rugby. It's like you need your superstars to also want to be like you need the best players. Like to want to be like media guys. Because it's like, I think even in North America, we got like two sports like hockey and baseball, where a
yeah,
lot of the best players are very robotic in front of the media, only
yeah,
really do what they're at, what they, the bare minimum media requirements and stuff. And as a result, sports like basketball and the NBA, right, or even the NFL as well, that like allow players to like kind of let their personalities fly are like exceeding those two sports in popularity, like well exceeding that, right? And I'm just kind of like watching this show, I'm just kind of like, even like getting to the end, like you said, I think Alan Wynne Jones not being there really stands out considering the themes of the last two episodes. Of
Yeah.
that one, like as you said, episode seven's literally called The Last Dance. They don't mention Alan Wynne Jones at all. It's it stands out, and it's also like so many England focused episodes, not one mention of Maro Itoje. Um, right, Irish episodes, like I said, Vanderfleer, I think had like 5 seconds of screen time, and I think that stuff stands out. But I also think it makes all the players that did do it look really well or look really good.
Yeah.
And I hope like
I've
they kind of gain fandom because I mean, personally, for me, watching this documentary, I became a way bigger fan of Finn Russell, a bigger fan
mm,
of Sebastian Negri, a bigger fan of Andrew Porter, a bigger fan, definitely a bigger fan of Stephen Varney and Blair Kinghorn. Like I just said a few minutes ago, I thought was the best player in the show. I think, or like as far as like their story and how it kind of played out, which shocked
mm,
me because again is another player that does not show up until like episode 7. But what they kind
yeah.
of did with him in 2 episodes, I thought was the best, I guess, development of an individual's like arc over the course of the Six Nations. And it was Blair Kinghorn out of all players. Kind of shocked by that. Um,
Yeah. I think yeah, every personality that, sat down and was being interviewed by the production staff,
yeah,
there was no everyone was likable. And I
yeah,
think
exactly.
that
They did a really good
does
job of
that
that. It was,
obviously
yeah,
goes great distance. But one thing I do want to mention is you also feel for the coaches as well, especially
that was good. Yeah.
yeah.
All of them, really. And
Yeah,
honestly, like that was the one thing I was like listening to, especially as some of the coaches like talking about like the media pressure. And I'm like,
yeah,
damn it, I have a podcast, and half of our podcast has been yelling about a coach um,
yeah,
over the past year. And I'm like, damn it, like I kind of feel bad about that now. Like it's obvious, it's a nice like reminder. It's like, yeah, like they're people. Like
yeah.
it's like
But
they go
it's
through
I think
emotion.
as well, it's also like we know that coaches will like sit down with players and they'll say like, this is what you need to improve. This is what you need to do. This is we'll look over the games. So that stuff, I'm like, okay, I'm aware of that. It's when um like Kieran Crowley and Warren Gatland's spend time with their respective wives.
Yeah,
And Crowley was mentioning that, people on, newspapers and social media think they can do their job. And he's saying he'll go to bed at 3 in the morning
yeah,
because he's staying up. And Warren Gatland coming back to Wales after leaving and saying like, would this have a negative effect on your legacy? And he's being like fully aware of that as well, and even just going near the place where they used to live when they first lived in Wales under his
well, even
first tenure.
I mean, I thought all that stuff was really good too. Even but even like
Yeah,
Andy Farrell, like talking about playing against Owen or whatever,
yeah,
and, like trying to steal like the grandkids and stuff for the weekend while they were
yeah,
like in Ireland. All that stuff was like all funny and like really,
yeah.
like you said, it's like it human like I don't want to say humanized, but it like it made
It
like
gave a
all the
depth
coaches,
to
yeah,
them
it
that
gave
you
them
hadn't
depth,
seen
gave
before.
them more of like, which I think is something, like you said, it's like that world rugby needs more of, and it's why I really do like this documentary is because,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like I know I just complained about certain players that are kind of like they feel like because I am a huge rugby fan, right? That
yeah,
feel like these guys are really big names that just are not in this series at all. And it kind of
mm,
feels like a weird omission for a lot of these guys. And there's more guys too. But like the ones that did show up, like I thought, like I said, it's like some of my favorite parts of this series, were like, Stephen Varney, talking to like his sports psychologist, who's
mm,
just trying to like psych him up for a like just trying to like psych him up for the game, but also it's like when it cuts to the game footage and it shows like Varney making a bad pass, right? It's like you have that scene with his sports psychologist, right? That's there. So it's like it shows the bad pass and then it shows his face and it gives you a understanding of like what is going through his mind like after that pass, right? Like as they've just turned
yeah,
the ball, stuff like that. I thought like even like the scene with him and Luis Rees-Zammit playing pool at a bar or whatever, I thought
Yeah.
was awesome because it's like one, that's something you never get to see ever, like, right? And then two, it was also just kind of funny to hear them both talking about the Six Nations and also like subtly like chirping each other as they're playing pool. Like
Yeah.
Louis like Reese Sammet kind of doing like the whole it's like, yeah, we really don't want the wooden spoon. Like, and then
Mm.
dot dot dot, you know what that feels like. It sucks, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever. Just to kind of like the little subtle like jab to be like, it's like, hey, like you Italy's won the wooden spoon a lot, but it's like, and then Varney can come back with like, yeah, but we beat you last year kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So like that banter was a lot of fun, as obviously like, with players that do know each other. I thought that was super interesting. And then I would also um like to me too, I think like Blair Kinghorn I thought was awesome in this.
Yeah.
Um right, like the whole that kind of arc in the Hogverse, like that kind of like the Last Dance episode, with like Stuart Hogg and Finn Russell and him being a fullback fly half utility guy, right? But you got like two legends in Scottish rugby ahead of you, right? And like him talking about like how hard it is to come off the bench in a game, like,
Mm.
is
Yeah.
something that it's like, when I think it's his was it his mom? Like he was at home with his family or whatever,
Yeah.
but it was like somebody in his family was like, it's like I don't understand like how you get ready, like, after you've been sitting for 60 minutes, and his response just being like, you don't.
Yeah.
Like you don't. It's 0 to 100 and you have no choice. That's like you don't get ready for it. Like you just go, right? And it's like, man, like that's a super like interesting perspective because obviously you all just see like, and when you watch a rugby game, you see the guys warming up and trying to stay loose on the sidelines, but also never really think about the fact that it's like, yeah, like by the time like those guys get into a game in like the 60th or 70th minute, it's like you've been sitting around, like you warmed up and then just sat around for like
Yeah.
almost 2 hours and then are expected to go out onto a professional rugby pitch and perform at an elite level. Like you're
Yeah.
basically you're going in cold. And it's like, I thought it was very interesting to hear like a player talking about how hard it is to come off the bench. A side note on this, Scotland's team lineup reveal compared to the other five teams in the Six Nations,
So
it's
much more dramatic.
psychotic. It's like, how is that good? It's just like literally like do what every other team does. Put the whole list up at once. The next slide button and everybody like watching the Scottish guys like sit there agonizing over like waiting for their position to show up in the roster to find out if they're playing. I'm like, they need to change that up. Like that just feels painful to watch. Or painful to sit through. Like, um, but then also like for Kinghorn too, like I thought it was really cool. Like unfortunately, Hogg and Russell both get hurt in the game the week before. So go or in the game against Ireland, and then they got to play Italy in the last game,
Mm.
right? And the build up to that is Kinghorn being excited to get a start in the Six Nations, start at fly half, but then it goes into this whole thing about how he thinks goal kicking is terrifying,
Yeah.
right? And explaining like all the pressure of like goal kicking and stuff. And I think it was also one, so I thought that was super interesting to hear him say, but I also thought it was some of the best like use of the rugby game to tell the story that they're trying to tell about these
Yeah.
players off the field, because it goes into that whole speech of how terrifying goal kicking is. To the first clip of the game is him missing a kick. And it's again,
Yeah.
it's the same thing with Varney and like, the mistake that he made. And it's like you go back to the sports psychologist scene, and it's like you get an idea of what's going through his head now. But
Yeah.
then it was also awesome to see him like rebound from that, make a couple kicks, score 3 tries, have an unreal game, right?
Yeah.
That made you super happy about it. Um, they did that a little bit too with Andrew Porter, where they kind of flashed back to him getting like lit up in the against France in a game last year, right? And then they immediately cut to like him winning like a scrum that leads to a try. Right. So it's like you kind of like you feel good for like Porter and like building up his confidence and stuff like that. I think the show um did well with a lot of the players' stories. But I
Mm.
think for me, like Varney and Kinghorn were the two that really stood out. Um, do you have like anybody else that like really kind of stood out for you, or like any thoughts on like the individual stories or anything else that you liked about the show?
Well, I've basically said everything that I liked, and like my favorite episode was probably episode 7, The
Yeah,
Last
yeah,
Dance.
yeah.
I liked
It got better as it went on.
yeah, I like the pressure cooker one as well, just because Wales actually winning a game in the Six Nations was nice to see. Um,
Dirty.
but yeah, overall, give it 8 out of 10. And if you haven't watched it already, I thoroughly recommend you watch Six Nations Full Contact.
Yeah.
All 8 episodes are out on Netflix. And if you are looking to watch any rugby coming up these next couple of weekends, we have the 2024 Six Nations, which is available on the Zone. As Derek pointed out, the Premiership is continuing in England on Sportsnet, as well as Premiership Women's Rugby on the Rugby Network. And joining the Rugby Network are UBC's games and the uh, BC Premier League. So you can watch that for free on the Rugby Network. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out more, as well as our written pieces, on our website, therougerugby.ca. You can also find our podcast on Spotify, S4P, and Apple Podcasts. We have our YouTube channel at the Rouge Rugby with episodes of the podcast. So make sure to hit the bell, like and subscribe, and stay up to date with all of our videos. We're also available across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads, all at the Rouge Rugby. Derek, where can people find you on social media?
At Reset the Jet across all social media platforms.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode. Derek, thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Rouge Rugby Podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.